Do TV shows and movie adaptations of comics help the comic or hurt the comic? A lot of people say help, and certainly it gives it more promotion and more exposure, but it doesn't always work out in the long run. And I think there's a couple unusual examples I'm going to throw at you, and let's see what you think. Hey, everybody, this is Perch. I got to thinking about this because of Outcast. So, Outcast is a skybound image comic by Kirkman, and being a big fan of Invincible and The Walking Dead, I mean, I enjoyed those series. I like what he brings to the table. I think Kirkman does a really good job with what he does, and I think Skybound is a really well curated line. And when Outcast came out, I liked that too. I liked the gritty style. It reminded me of The Walking Dead. It was definitely a horror based book. I think it did kind of creeping horror very well. Artwork was scratchy and had a very distinctive style to it that I thought was good. And I liked the depth of the characters and everything they put together. I also like that Kirkman was saying that it's going to be I have the ending in sight. I've got this run in mind. We're gonna do this thing for about 50 issues or so, and this is the story we're gonna tell. I always like it when authors say that, even when they don't always mean it. It's not uncommon that they say these things and then it just stretches on and on. They're like, hey, money is here, and then they just keep going. That's quite possible, or quite common as well. But Outcast is a book I enjoyed, and then they did the TV series. Was it AMC that did it? God, where did it? I don't think it was AMC. Maybe it was. I don't know. No, it wasn't AMC. Whatever. It went on to a network, and the show started coming out, and it was weird. It was like the show took interest away from the comic for me. What was a comic I was looking forward to and actually thought had a pretty unique and quirky style, the show seemed to detract rather than help. And I can't say that there's negatives to the actors or any of that. I think it was a well structured show, no real complaints. It was fine. The people in it, gave good performances. They certainly had a creeping horror aspect, but for whatever reason, it was different enough from the comic, or it just moved at a pace that for me, I grew less interested in the comic as I watched the show, and then I stopped watching the show, and then I found that it was the comic that was toward the end of my pull list to read rather than up near the top like it originally was. And I thought this was really weird because I couldn't detect anything in the comic that got worse. The art didn't get worse, the story was still there, still had kind of this big world and everything they go into. It just seemed to take away from it. And I thought this was just me and me being crazy and other things. And I started talking to other people, and they're like, yeah, we have the same impression. When the show came out, we lost interest in the show. And another show was like that was Deadly Class, where we really loved that book. It had a good kind of punk 80s feel to it. And then the show came out and it was like, yeah, I don't feel like I need to watch or read the comic anymore, and I don't really want to watch. So it seemed to defeat both mediums at once, and nobody could put their finger on it. Whereas things like Doctor Strange, the movie, I mean, certainly a Marvel movie and everything that goes along with Marvel movies, Infinity War and Endgame and all the rest, on its own level, pump people up for the comics. Actually, a better example is probably Black Panther. Lots of people like or dislike Black Panther. Some people absolutely hated it, and I've said this before, and they say I'm crazy, but Black Panther, the movie, generated a lot of interest for people to want to go and check out Black Panther, the comic, which, as it turned out, had very little to do with the movie, which is a whole other video. But it inspired people to want to read more, good or bad. There was an uptick of interest, whereas some of these other shows seem to have a decrease of interest. And I noticed the same thing happened when Justice League came out. The movie, and some might say, well, it was a bad movie. Maybe so. Justice League had that, but I can't necessarily criticize Outcast. I think the show was done, by the book. Maybe that's part of the problem. It was a little bit too much by the book. Deadly Class, I think, was not as good in how it rolled out as Outbreak. I nearly swerved to avoid a car coming at me. That was a little in my voice there. Sorry about that. But So what is it about that, and why is it that movies are not always additive? I think a lot of people, certainly in the business and comics, will say, "Well, the movie comes out, we're going to see a bump in sales," and you can view proof that that does not always happen. Sometimes a movie comes out, you get like one issue bump. See, sometimes not even that. I mean, I think you can definitely see that with some of the shows I mentioned. um, but you actually see, if you look, you lay down kind of side by side the show doing its run, and then the comic. You see the comic dropping to levels before the show came out at a faster pace than before the show came out. So there's definitely some correlation there that happened in the comic. So I think it's something that people need to think about where the movie or the show is concerned, that these things don't always help. Sometimes they hurt. They have the power to give and take away simultaneously. And if you don't get it right, you could wind up doing damage to something that is, clocking along, doing just fine on its own, and actually wind up kind of wasting a bunch of money both directions. I think that's a negative that certainly we've seen. But I'm also curious, what other things can we say like this? I think there's been Marvel movies kind of up down. I think Captain Marvel the movie didn't do a whole lot for Captain Marvel the comic, just in terms of kind of sales bump and interest. I think it did do a lot for what I call auxiliary Captain Marvel, and this would be things like Captain Marvel comics that aren't the core comic, like the IDW, for kids version, or some of the Captain Marvel merchandise. Certainly, there was Captain Marvel merchandise that sold, but we didn't see that in the comic book. And we did see interest after Infinity War, and more Infinity War than Endgame. We did see interest in the comics. Doctor Strange, yes, absolutely. Captain America, probably yes. Winter Soldier saw some additional interest. Um, the Wonder Woman movie, absolutely, definitely saw an uptick in comics there. Uh, Aquaman, not really. The movie did well, but didn't really seem to impact the comics much at all in terms of interest. And then, like I said, this other phenomenon where you have interest in a book, like you see with Outcast and and Deadly Class. I'm throwing a bunch of names out. It's like at some point I'm going to mispronounce horribly one of these. It's just going to happen. They're going to get merged together in my voice. And you see kind of a tepid response to the show and a drop in the comic. It's just an interesting situation. I think a lot of comic creators really ought to take note of it, particularly for things like some of the others like sex criminals and some of the others that have been pushing really hard to get their show. They really want to get a show going, and then you get that show and you have one season, and some people make some money, but it's like, it was just there, and then the comic also suffers. Sex criminals coming to an end anyway, so that's probably a terrible example, but hopefully you see my point. I'm curious to see, A, do you fall into any of this? Has your interest in something decreased when the media came out about it? B, I'm crazy. You just love everything you can get, and the more the better. And by the way, I'll throw in there, I'm a little bit that guy too. Even if I don't like something, I am happiest when more comics and more stuff and more promotion is coming out. So even if I don't like a Marvel movie or DC movie or everything else, I am happy they're happening. It's as a long time collector of comics, it's cool to see these things push more and more to the mainstream. For me, that's the underlined bulleted, bolded text of all this, is that better, if whether I like it personally or not, I'm glad it exists, and that's always the case for nearly everything. There are some exceptions out there. I'm sure I can find them. Anyway, where are you sitting on all this? Leave a comment below. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I think I was going to go through a whole list of different opinions you could have, but I'll just shut up and let you give them rather than than make you a pick your own adventure kind of thing. Like, subscribe if you don't mind, and most importantly, always importantly, thank you for listening.